The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop in the middle of nowhere, and Victoria Nichols knew with cold certainty that something had gone terribly wrong when the driver appeared at the door with eyes that refused to meet hers, and a pistol pointed at her chest. "Out," he said, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Now." Victoria's hands trembled as she gathered her skirts, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What is the meaning of this? I paid my fare to Julian." "Change of plans, lady. Your husband's business partner paid me double to make sure you never make it to California. Now get out before I put a bullet in you right here." The words hit her like a physical blow. James. Her husband's business partner had always smiled too widely, his eyes calculating when he thought no one was watching. She had warned Thomas, but her husband had dismissed her concerns. Now Thomas was dead 3 months, and she was trying to reach the mining claim in Julian, California that was rightfully hers, the claim worth a fortune in gold that James clearly wanted for himself. "Please," she whispered, stepping down from the stagecoach. The heat of the Arizona desert hit her like a furnace, the sun merciless overhead. "At least leave me some water." The driver laughed, a cruel sound that echoed across the empty landscape. "You know too much, Mrs. Nichols. You die out here, it looks like an accident, a tragic mishap." No one asks questions. He climbed back up to the driver's seat, leaving her standing alone among the creosote bushes and endless sand. Should have stayed in St. Louis. She watched in horror as the stagecoach rolled away, taking with it her trunk, her water, her only hope of survival. The April sun beat down on her dark traveling dress, already making sweat bead on her forehead. It was 1883, and she was about to die alone in the desert because she had trusted the wrong people. Victoria forced herself to think. Panic would kill her faster than the heat. She had perhaps a day, maybe 2 if she found shade, before dehydration took her. The stagecoach had been traveling west toward California. If she followed the trail, perhaps another traveler would come along. But the roads were lonely out here. Days could pass between stagecoaches. She started walking, each step deliberate. Her boots, designed for city streets, were already pinching her feet. The sun climbed higher, and she could feel her skin beginning to burn. She had no hat, no parasol, nothing to shield her from the relentless heat. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with hardy desert plants and rocky outcroppings that shimmered in the heat. By afternoon, her throat was parched, her lips cracking. She had long since abandoned the road, heading instead toward what looked like a rocky hillside that might offer some shade. Each breath felt like inhaling flames. Her vision began to blur at the edges, and she stumbled over rocks she should have seen. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Victoria collapsed behind a large boulder. She had walked for hours, and she knew she could go no further. Her tongue was thick in her mouth, her head pounding. She closed her eyes, thinking of Thomas, of the life they had planned together, of all the things that would now never be. She must have lost consciousness because when she opened her eyes again, the sky was dark, scattered with more stars than she had ever seen in her life. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and she was shivering now instead of sweating. She tried to stand, but her legs would not support her. The cold was almost as dangerous as the heat had been. Victoria lay there, drifting in and out of awareness, watching the stars wheel overhead. She thought she heard sounds in the darkness, the soft footfalls of desert animals, but she was beyond caring. Death, when it came, would at least be peaceful. Dawn broke with painful brightness, the sun returning to torture her further. Victoria could no longer move, her body shutting down from dehydration. She watched with detached interest as a lizard scurried across a nearby rock. At least she would die seeing the sunrise one last time. Then she heard it. The soft thud of hoofbeats, the jingle of tack. She tried to call out, but no sound emerged from her cracked lips. The hoofbeats came closer, and then a shadow fell across her face, blocking the terrible sun. "Jesus Christ," a man's voice said, deep and rough with shock. Victoria tried to focus on the face above her, but the sun created a halo around his head, turning him into a dark silhouette. She felt strong hands slide under her shoulders, lifting her with surprising gentleness. "Easy now," the voice said. "I have got you, can you hear me?" She managed the smallest of nods. "Good. I am going to give you water, but you have to drink it slow, understand? Just small sips." A canteen appeared at her lips, and the first drops of water touched her tongue. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever tasted. She tried to gulp it down, but he pulled it back. "I said slow. You will make yourself sick otherwise." Over the next several minutes, he gave her water in careful amounts, his hands steady and patient. As her senses began to return, Victoria could finally see her rescuer clearly. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of sage. His dark hair was long enough to curl slightly at his collar, and his face was lean and handsome beneath several days' worth of stubble. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, dusty leather chaps, a worn shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice gentle now. "Victoria," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Victoria Nichols. I am Kane Wilson." "What in God's name are you doing out here alone?" The story came out in broken sentences as he continued to give her water and examined her for injuries. His face grew darker with anger as she explained about the stagecoach driver, about James, and the mining claim in Julian. "That is where I am headed," Kane said, his eyes meeting hers. "Julian. I have work lined up at one of the mines there, but first we need to get you somewhere safe. There is a way station about 10 miles northeast of here. Can you ride?" Victoria looked at his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, and nodded even though she was not sure she could stay conscious that long. Kane seemed to read her doubts. "I will hold you. You will not fall." He lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, settling into the saddle before pulling her up in front of him. His arm wrapped around her waist, solid and secure, and Victoria let herself lean back against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, and somehow that single point of contact with another human being after her ordeal made her eyes well with tears. "You are safe now," Kane said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "I promise you, you are safe." They rode through the morning, Kane keeping the horse to a steady walk and stopping frequently to give Victoria more water and let her rest. He did not push her to talk, simply kept her secure against him and scanned the horizon with the watchful eyes of someone used to danger. "How did you find me?" Victoria finally asked as they rode. "I saw your trail, noticed where the stagecoach had stopped, saw the footprints heading off the road. I am a tracker, among other things. Grew up learning to read sign in country like this. When I saw your trail, saw you were alone with no supplies, I knew you were in trouble. You saved my life." She felt him shrug behind her. "Could not very well leave you out there to die. Many men would have. Then they are not much of men, are they?" The way station appeared like a mirage in the distance, a squat adobe building with a corral and a well. Kane called out as they approached, and an elderly Mexican couple emerged, their faces creasing with concern when they saw Victoria's condition. The woman, who introduced herself as Señora Martinez, clucked her tongue and immediately took charge, leading Victoria inside to a small but clean room. She helped Victoria out of her filthy, torn dress and into a simple cotton shift, bathing her sunburned skin with cool water and applying a soothing salve that smelled of herbs. "You rest now," Senora Martinez said in heavily accented English. "You need to regain your strength. That cowboy, he brought you just in time. Another day, maybe two, you would be dead." Victoria slept for hours, waking only when Senora Martinez brought her broth and bread. Through the open window, she could hear Kane talking with Senor Martinez in the yard, discussing routes to Julian and the best way to avoid the men who might still be looking for her. It took 2 days before Victoria felt strong enough to travel again. During that time, Kane was a constant, quiet presence. He checked on her regularly, bringing her water and the simple meals Senora Martinez prepared. He did not press her for more details about her situation, did not ask questions that made her uncomfortable. He simply watched over her with a protective intensity that made her feel safer than she had in months. On the evening of the second day, Victoria finally felt well enough to sit outside as the sun set. Kane brought her a chair and sat nearby, working on repairing a piece of tack. "I need to get to Julian," Victoria said, breaking the comfortable silence. "That mining claim is all I have left. If James gets his hands on it, everything Thomas and I worked for will be gone." Kane's hand stilled on the leather. "This James, he has that much reach. He has money and connections. And I am just a widow with no family, no protection. The law tends to side with men like him." "Not always." Kane set down the tack and looked at her directly. "Julian is a rough town, but it is fairly lawful. The mine owners there do not take kindly to claim jumping and fraud. If you have the deed to that claim, you have rights. I have the deed. It was in my reticule when the driver threw me out. He did not bother to search me, thought I would die before I could use it." Kane nodded slowly. "Then we will get you to Julian and we will make sure your claim is protected. I know some people there, men who work honest and do not care for bullies." "Why are you helping me?" Victoria asked softly. "You do not know me. You could have left me in the desert, or you could have brought me here and continued on your way. Why stay?" Kane was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon where the sun was painting the clouds in shades of gold and crimson. "My mother died when I was 12, he said finally. "My father was working a ranch in Texas, and she came out to join him. The stagecoach broke down in the heat, and the driver left the passengers to wait while he went for help. By the time someone came back, my mother was dead. Heat stroke, they said." His jaw tightened. "I swore then that if I ever found someone in trouble like that, I would not turn away. Could not live with myself if I did." Victoria's throat tightened with emotion. "I am so sorry." "It was a long time ago." Kane stood, picking up the repaired tack. "We will leave at first light. It is about a 3-day ride to Julian if we take it steady. Senor Martinez says there is good water along the way, places we can camp safely." That night, Victoria lay awake in the small room, listening to the sounds of the desert through the open window. Her body still ached, her skin still burned, but she was alive. Because of Kane Wilson, she was alive. She thought about the way he had looked at her when he had found her, the horror and concern in his eyes. She thought about the gentleness of his hands as he had given her water, the solid warmth of him as they had ridden to safety. She barely knew this man, and yet she trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. There was something fundamentally decent about Kane Wilson, something honest and true that shone through in everything he did. They set out the next morning with supplies from the Martinez family, and their sincere wishes for a safe journey. Kane had purchased a gentle mare for Victoria to ride, not trusting her to make the journey doubled up on his horse. Victoria was grateful for his thoughtfulness, even though part of her missed the security of being held against him. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled west, the harsh desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and pine. The air grew cooler as they climbed in elevation, and Victoria began to see why Julian was such a desirable location for mining. The land here was rich, the mountains hiding veins of gold that had drawn prospectors and miners for years. They talked as they rode, the long hours giving them time to learn about each other. Kane told her about growing up on ranches across Texas and New Mexico, about learning to work cattle and break horses. He spoke of his years drifting from job to job, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "I saved enough to buy some land someday," he said as they watered the horses at a creek. "Want to start my own ranch, small at first but honest, build something that is mine." Victoria told him about her marriage to Thomas, about their dreams of building something together in California. She spoke of how Thomas had won the mining claim in a poker game, how he had been planning to develop it when he had been killed in a riding accident back in St. Louis. "I think it was not an accident," Victoria admitted as they made camp that second night. "I think James had something to do with it, but I could never prove it. Thomas went riding alone and his horse came back without him. They found him at the bottom of a ravine with a broken neck. Kane's face was hard in the firelight. And then James tried to buy the claim from you. He offered me a pittance. When I refused, he tried to have me declared incompetent to manage my own affairs. Said a woman could not possibly run a mining operation. That was when I decided to come to California myself, to take possession of the claim and hire my own manager." "You are braver than you think," Kane said, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. "I was terrified," Victoria confessed. "I still am. I have no idea how to run a mine. I just know I cannot let James win, cannot let him profit from Thomas's death. You will figure it out. And you will not be alone." Kane poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "Julian has plenty of experienced miners looking for honest work. You find the right foreman, someone you can trust, and he will handle the day-to-day operations. You just have to be there to make the decisions and sign the papers." It sounded so simple when he said it, but Victoria knew it would be far more complicated. Still, his confidence in her made her feel stronger, made her believe that perhaps she really could do this. On the third night, they camped in the foothills, and Julian was less than a day's ride away. Victoria stood looking at the stars, wrapped in the blanket Kane had insisted she take, and felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would have to face the reality of her situation, the claim, the threats from James, the challenge of making her way in a rough mining town. "You are worried," Kane said, coming to stand beside her. "I am wondering what I am riding into. James sent that stagecoach driver to kill me. What is to stop him from trying again when I arrive in Julian? Me." Kane's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I will stay with you, help you get established, make it clear that you are not alone and unprotected. You do not owe me that. You already saved my life. Maybe I am not doing it because I owe you." Kane turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his eyes were dark and serious. "Maybe I am doing it because I want to." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. There was something in the way he was looking at her, something that made her heart beat faster and her skin flush with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She barely knew this man, and yet standing here with him felt more right than anything had in a very long time. "Kane," she whispered, not even sure what she wanted to say. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, calloused and warm. "I know it is too soon," he said quietly. "I know you are still grieving your husband, still dealing with everything that has happened. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I see the bravest, strongest woman I have ever met, and I would be honored to stand by your side for as long as you will have me." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such simple honesty and respect. Even Thomas, whom she had loved, had always treated her as something delicate and decorative, something to be protected and managed. "I am not ready," she said, her voice breaking. "Not ready for anything beyond friendship. But Kane, I am so grateful you are here. I do not think I could face tomorrow without you." "Then that is enough." He squeezed her hand gently before stepping back. "Friendship is enough. The rest, if it comes, will come in its own time." They reached Julian late the following afternoon, riding into a bustling mining town nestled in the mountains. The main street was crowded with miners, merchants, and the usual collection of saloons and supply stores that sprang up wherever gold was found. It was rougher than St. Louis, dustier and louder, but there was an energy to the place that Victoria found oddly appealing. Kane led them directly to the land office, a small building near the center of town. The clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up in surprise when they entered. "Help you folks." Victoria stepped forward, pulling the deed from her reticule. "My name is Victoria Nichols. My late husband, Thomas Nichols, won a mining claim here in a legal poker game last year. I am here to take possession of it." The clerk's eyebrows rose. He took the deed and examined it carefully, then cross-referenced it with his ledgers. After several long minutes, he nodded. "Yes, the Nichols claim. Good property, up in the hills about 2 miles northeast of town. There has been some activity there, actually. Fellow named James Hardwick was here last week trying to file papers claiming the property had been abandoned." Victoria's hands clenched into fists. "It has not been abandoned. I am the rightful owner." "Well, he will be disappointed to hear that." The clerk made several notations in his ledger. "I will make a note that you have arrived and are taking active possession. You will need to register at the mining office as well, pay the annual fees. But the claim is legally yours, Mrs. Nichols." "Thank you." Victoria felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. At least the law was on her side here. They left the land office and made their way to the mining office, where Victoria completed the necessary paperwork and paid the fees. The mining commissioner, a gruff man named Henderson, looked her over skeptically. "You planning to work this claim yourself?" "I plan to hire a competent foreman and crew," Victoria said, meeting his gaze steadily. Henderson grunted. "Smart. The Nichols claim is a good one, rich vein if the surveys are right, but it will take money to develop it properly. You have capital for that, some, and I can raise more if necessary." "Well, good luck to you, Mrs. Nichols. Not many women running claims around here, but I have seen stranger things. You need advice, you come see me. I run an honest operation in this town, and I do not take kindly to anyone trying to cheat or intimidate claim owners, regardless of their gender." It was more support than Victoria had expected, and she left the office feeling more confident. Kane was waiting outside, leaning against a post with his thumbs hooked in his belt. "How did it go?" "Better than I feared. Commissioner Henderson seems inclined to help me, and the claim is officially registered in my name." She paused. "Kane, James was here last week trying to claim the property was abandoned. He must have assumed I would never make it to Julian." Kane's jaw tightened. "Then he is going to be very surprised when he finds out you did. We need to find you a place to stay, somewhere safe. Then we should ride out to the claim tomorrow, see what condition it is in." They found a respectable boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. The woman was kind but shrewd, and she agreed to rent Victoria a room on the condition that she paid 2 weeks in advance. "Not that I do not trust you, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, "but I have been burned before by folks who skip out on their rent. Cash is king in a mining town." Victoria paid from her dwindling funds and carried her few belongings up to a small but clean room on the second floor. It had a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the mountains. After days of traveling and sleeping on the hard ground, it felt like luxury. Kane had taken a room at a boarding house for working men on the other side of town. He came by that evening to check on Victoria, and they had dinner together at a small restaurant that served surprisingly good food. "I will come by at first light," Kane said as they finished their meal. "We will ride out to the claim, see what we are dealing with." "You keep saying we," Victoria said softly. "Kane, I cannot ask you to give up your job opportunity for me. You said you had work lined up at one of the mines." "I will send word that the job fell through. It is not a problem." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Victoria, I told you I would see this through, and I will. I am not leaving you to face this alone." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he had already done enough, but the truth was she did not want him to leave. The thought of facing everything ahead without him made her chest tighten with anxiety. "Thank you," she said instead, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I do not know what I did to deserve your help, but I am grateful for it." His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "You did not have to do anything. Some things are just meant to be." They rode out to the claim early the next morning, following a rough trail that wound up into the mountains. The property was beautiful, situated in a valley with a year-round stream running through it. There was evidence of previous mining activity, a shaft dug into the hillside, piles of tailings, and the remains of a small camp. Kane examined everything with a practiced eye, poking around the shaft entrance and studying the rock samples scattered about. "Someone has been here recently," he said, pointing to tracks and disturbed earth. "Within the last few days, I would say, and they were not just looking around. They were doing actual excavation work." Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. "James, it has to be." He was trying to establish a claim by working the property, which would have held up in court if you had not arrived to assert your ownership. Kane's face was grim. "He is going to be angry when he realizes you are here. We need to establish a presence, get some men up here working the claim legitimately." They spent the rest of the day exploring the property and making notes. Kane used his knowledge of mining to assess the potential of the claim, and his evaluation was positive. "Thomas won well in that poker game," Kane said as they prepared to ride back to town. "This is good gold country. With the right investment and the right crew, you could make a real profit here." Back in Julian, Kane helped Victoria draft an advertisement for a foreman and mining crew. They posted it at the general store, the mining office, and several of the saloons. By evening, Victoria had received 3 inquiries, all from experienced miners looking for steady work. She interviewed them in the parlor of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, with Kane sitting quietly in the corner. The first 2 men were competent but uninspiring. The third, however, was exactly what Victoria needed. His name was Owen Richards, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He had been mining in California for 20 years and had excellent references. "I will be honest with you, Mrs. Nichols," Owen said. "I have worked for owners who did not know a thing about mining, and it went fine as long as they were willing to listen and trust their foreman. I run an honest crew, no shortcuts, no cheating. You pay fair wages and supply proper equipment, I will get you gold. That is my promise." Victoria liked him immediately. There was something solid and trustworthy about Owen Richards, and when she glanced at Kane, he gave her a small nod of approval. "You are hired, Mr. Richards." "When can you start?" I can have a crew assembled by tomorrow afternoon. We will start by properly securing the shaft and doing a thorough survey of the vein. Should not need more than 6 men to start, though we may expand later if the yield justifies it. They discussed terms, wages, and supplies. Owen promised to handle the purchasing of necessary equipment and to keep detailed records of all expenditures. By the time he left, Victoria felt like she had finally taken a real step toward making the claim successful. "You made a good choice," Kane said after Owen had gone. "I asked around about him this afternoon. Everyone says he is honest and capable. I trust your judgment." Victoria sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Everything was happening so fast, and the enormity of what she was undertaking was beginning to sink in. "Kane, what if I fail? What if I have bitten off more than I can chew?" He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "Then you will dust yourself off and try again." "But you will not fail, Victoria. You are too stubborn and too smart to fail." She laughed despite herself. "Stubborn? Is that supposed to be a compliment? In this case, yes." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands, the touch sending warmth up her arms. "Stubborn means you do not give up when things get hard. Stubborn means you fight for what is yours. Those are good qualities out here." Looking into his eyes, Victoria felt something shift inside her. Over the past week, Kane had become more than just her rescuer, more than just a friend. He had become essential to her, a steady presence that made her feel capable of facing anything. And the way he was looking at her now, with such tenderness and admiration, made her heart ache with feelings she was not quite ready to name. "I should let you get some rest," Kane said, standing reluctantly. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." After he left, Victoria sat in the parlor for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened since that terrible moment when the stagecoach driver had pointed a gun at her. She had nearly died in the desert, had been rescued by a stranger, had traveled across dangerous country, and had arrived in Julian to claim her inheritance. And through it all, Kane Wilson had been there, steady and strong and unfailingly kind. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Despite everything, despite her grief over Thomas and her fear about the future, she was falling in love with the cowboy who had saved her life. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Owen assembled his crew and began work on the claim. Victoria rode out each day to observe, learning as much as she could about the mining process. Kane was always at her side, asking questions and making suggestions that showed his quick intelligence. It was on the 4th day that James Hardwick finally made his appearance. Victoria was at the claim, discussing the survey results with Owen, when she heard the sound of approaching horses. She turned to see 3 men riding up the trail, and her blood ran cold when she recognized James in the lead. He looked much as she remembered, tall and well-dressed, with iron-gray hair and cold blue eyes. The 2 men with him were clearly hired muscle, hard-faced and heavily armed. James reined in his horse and stared at Victoria with undisguised fury. So the little widow survived the desert. How inconvenient. Kane stepped forward, placing himself between Victoria and James. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip, the gesture casual but unmistakable. "You are on private property," Kane said, his voice level and hard. "State your business or leave." James's eyes narrowed as he assessed Kane. "Who is this, Victoria? Your new protector. How quickly you moved on from poor Thomas." "Do not you dare speak my husband's name," Victoria said, stepping up beside Kane. Her voice shook with rage. "You had him killed. I know you did. And then you tried to have me killed too. But I am still here, James, and this claim is mine. Legally and rightfully mine." "You have no proof of any wrongdoing on my part," James said smoothly. "As for the claim, we will see how long you can hold it. Mining is expensive, Victoria. Accidents happen. Equipment fails. Workers get spooked and quit. I wonder how long you can last before you are forced to sell, preferably to someone who can actually develop the property properly. Is that a threat? Kane asked, his hand tightening on his pistol. It is a statement of fact. This is a dangerous business for anyone, let alone a woman with no experience and no support. James smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I will give you 1 month, Victoria. 1 month before you come crawling to me, begging me to take this claim off your hands. And when you do, I will pay you even less than I offered in St. Louis. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his 2 hired guns following. The whole crew had stopped working to watch the confrontation, and the silence that followed was heavy with tension. Owen came over, his face concerned. Mrs. Nichols, that man is bad news. I know his type. He will try to sabotage the operation, maybe even hurt someone to scare you off. Let him try, Victoria said, her voice steadier than she felt. We will post guards at night. Any equipment or supplies are to be locked up when not in use. And if anyone sees James Hardwick or his men near this claim, I want to be notified immediately. Yes, madam. Owen nodded approvingly. I will spread the word to the crew. We will keep this place secure. That night, Kane insisted on staying at the boarding house, sleeping in a chair in the downstairs parlor despite Mrs. Patterson's protests that it was not proper. Victoria was too grateful for his presence to argue about propriety. She lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep. The confrontation with James had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. He had all but confessed to being behind Thomas's death and her own attempted murder, and she still had no way to prove it. And now he was threatening to sabotage the mine, to hurt her workers. The next morning, Victoria went to see Commissioner Henderson. She told him about James's visit and his thinly veiled threats. Henderson listened carefully, his face growing darker as she spoke. Hardwick has been trouble since he arrived in Julian, Henderson said. But he is clever, always stays just on the right side of the law. I can have a deputy keep an eye on your claim, make regular patrols. But unless Hardwick does something overtly illegal, my hands are tied. I understand. Thank you for your help, Commissioner. As Victoria left the mining office, she nearly collided with a woman rushing in the opposite direction. The woman grabbed Victoria's arm to steady her, then looked up with a gasp. You must be Victoria Nichols. I have been looking for you. The woman was perhaps 30, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. She was dressed practically in a riding skirt and simple blouse, and there was an intensity about her that immediately captured Victoria's attention. I am Victoria, and you are Sarah Chen. My husband works for James Hardwick, or rather, he did until yesterday. James fired him when he refused to do something illegal. Mrs. Nichols, I think you need to hear what my husband knows about James's activities. Victoria's heart began to pound. Yes, I think I do. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? They ended up at the boarding house, in Victoria's room with Kane standing guard outside the door. Sarah's husband, Robert Chen, was a bookkeeper who had been working for James for 6 months. What he told Victoria was damning. James has been bribing officials, falsifying mining reports, and running illegal operations all over the territory, Robert said, his accent revealing his Eastern education. I kept copies of everything: ledgers, correspondence, contracts. I knew someday someone would need proof of what he was doing. Why did you not go to the authorities before? Victoria asked. Robert exchanged a glance with his wife. Because we are Chinese, Mrs. Nichols. Even with proof, most law officers would not believe us over a white businessman with money and connections. But you are white, you are respectable, and you have just as much motivation to see James brought to justice. If you take this evidence to the commissioner, he will listen." Victoria looked at the stack of papers Robert laid out on her bed. Months of carefully documented crimes, all in James's own hand. It was exactly what she needed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you for trusting me with this." Sarah smiled. "We have been waiting for someone like you, someone who could actually use this information. Thomas was a good man. He did not deserve what happened to him, and neither do you." With Robert's evidence in hand, Victoria returned to Commissioner Henderson. She spread the documents across his desk and watched as his eyes widened. "Good God," Henderson breathed. "If this is all legitimate, Hardwick has committed enough crimes to hang twice over." "It is legitimate. Mr. Chen kept meticulous records. Dates, times, amounts, everything." Victoria leaned forward. "Commissioner, I want James Hardwick arrested and charged, and I want my husband's death investigated properly. I believe James had him killed to get access to this mining claim." Henderson was already reaching for his hat. "I will bring him in today, Mrs. Nichols. You may have just broken up the biggest corruption ring in this territory. If you will excuse me, I have work to do." It took 3 days, but when it was over, James Hardwick was in jail awaiting trial on multiple charges including fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. The investigation into Thomas's death had been reopened, and witnesses were coming forward who had seen James meeting with the man whose horse had allegedly caused Thomas's fatal fall. Victoria stood outside the jailhouse, staring at the barred windows, feeling a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. She had gotten justice for Thomas, had ensured that James would pay for his crimes. But it did not bring her husband back. It did not erase the pain and grief of the past months. Kane came up beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "It is over. Yes, it is over." She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "What happens now? Now you build your life, run your mind, make it successful. Prove that you can do exactly what you set out to do. And you, will you stay in Julian?" Kane was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you want me to stay." Victoria's breath caught. She knew what he was asking, knew what he was offering. And she realized that somewhere between the desert and Julian, between nearly dying and fighting for her future, she had found something she thought she had lost forever. Hope, love, the possibility of happiness. "I want you to stay," she said softly. "Not as my protector or my employee. I want you to stay because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Kane's face transformed, a smile breaking across his features like sunrise. "I was hoping you would say that." He reached for her then, pulling her into his arms right there on the street, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. She kissed him back, pouring into it all the gratitude and affection and love that had been building inside her for weeks. When they finally broke apart, Victoria was laughing and crying at the same time. "This is scandalous. People will talk. Let them talk." Kane cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Victoria Nichols, I love you. I have loved you since the moment I found you in that desert. I know it is fast. I know it is crazy, but I cannot help it. You are the strongest, bravest, most incredible woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice in letting me stay." "I love you too," Victoria whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way again, not after Thomas. But Kane, what I feel for you is different. It is not better or worse, just different. More equal somehow, like we are partners. We are partners. In everything, if you will have me." Over the following months, Victoria's mind began to produce gold, just as Owen had predicted. The claim was even richer than the original surveys had suggested, and with careful management and honest workers, it became one of the most successful operations in the Julian area. Kane took a job as a foreman at a neighboring ranch, saving his wages with single-minded determination. He and Victoria courted properly, with all the small-town scrutiny that entailed. Mrs. Patterson was thrilled to have such an exciting romance unfolding under her roof, and she made sure Victoria was properly chaperoned while still allowing the couple time alone. They married in the fall of 1883 in a small ceremony at the Julian church. Sarah and Robert Chen were there, along with Owen Richards and his wife, Commissioner Henderson, and half the town. Victoria wore a simple cream-colored dress, and Kane wore his best suit, looking so handsome that Victoria's heart skipped when she saw him waiting at the altar. "I, Kane Wilson, take you, Victoria Nichols, to be my wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes, to be your partner, your friend, and your love for all the days of my life." Victoria's own vows were interrupted by tears, but she managed to get through them. "I, Victoria Nichols, take you, Kane Wilson, to be my husband. You saved my life in the desert, but more than that, you taught me to live again. I promise to love you, honor you, and walk beside you always." When Kane kissed her as his wife, Victoria felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. This was right. This was where she was meant to be, with this man in this place, building a life together. They used the profits from Victoria's mine to buy a piece of land just outside Julian. Kane designed and built their house himself, with help from friends and hired workers. It was not a grand mansion, but it was solid and comfortable, with a wide porch that looked out over the mountains. Victoria continued to oversee her mining operation, but she also threw herself into life in Julian. She helped establish a school, contributed to the church, and became known as a fair but tough businesswoman. Kane worked their ranch, building a small but respectable herd of cattle. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Victoria's late husband, was born in the summer of 1884. Kane held the tiny baby with such gentle wonder that Victoria fell in love with him all over again. "He is perfect," Kane whispered, tracing his finger over Thomas's tiny hand. "You are perfect. We are perfect together," Victoria corrected, leaning against his shoulder as they looked at their son. 2 years later they had a daughter, Emily, who had her father's sage-colored eyes and her mother's determination. The children grew up wild and happy, riding horses before they could properly walk and exploring the mountains around their home. Victoria never forgot the stagecoach driver who had tried to kill her, but she also never forgot that his cruelty had led her to Kane. James Hardwick died in prison 5 years after his conviction, unrepentant to the end. Victoria did not attend his funeral. The mine continued to produce for another decade before the vein finally played out. By then, Victoria had diversified her investments, and she and Kane were comfortable if not wealthy. They sold the claim to a large mining company and focused on their ranch, which Kane had expanded into a successful operation. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kane took Victoria back to the place where he had found her in the desert. They rode out together in the early morning, when the light was soft and the heat had not yet built to its midday intensity. "Why did you want to come here?" Victoria asked as they stood looking at the boulder where she had collapsed. "Because this is where our story began," Kane said, taking her hand. "This is where I found you, where everything changed. I wanted to remember that, remember how precious every moment with you is." Victoria looked at the desert landscape, no longer terrifying but strangely beautiful in its harsh simplicity. 10 years ago, she had been dying here, alone and hopeless. Now she was standing here with the man she loved, healthy and happy and deeply grateful for the life they had built together. "Thank you for finding me," she said softly. Kane pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Thank you for letting me." They had 2 more children over the years, another son and another daughter, and their house was always full of noise and laughter. Victoria taught her daughters to be strong and independent, to never let anyone tell them what they could not do. Kane taught his sons to be gentle and respectful, to value honesty and hard work above all else. As the years passed and the century turned, Victoria and Kane watched Julian grow from a rough mining town into a proper community. They saw automobiles replace horses, saw the railroad extend into the mountains, saw the world change in ways they could never have imagined when they first met. But through it all, their love remained constant. They were partners in every sense of the word, equals who respected and cherished each other. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset, hands clasped, content in the simple pleasure of being together. Victoria lived to see all 4 of her children married and happy. She held her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days, of a time when California was still wild and anything seemed possible if you were brave enough to reach for it. Kane was with her until the end, his hand holding hers as she slipped peacefully away at the age of 73. He followed her 18 months later, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, with a view of the mountains they had both loved. Their gravestone was simple, bearing their names and dates, but someone, probably one of their children, had added an inscription. He found her trail and brought her water. She gave him a reason to stay. Together they built a love that lasted forever. It was a fitting epitaph for a love story that had begun with desperation and rescue, but had grown into something deep and enduring. The kind of love that transforms lives, that gives meaning to suffering, that proves that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the greatest blessings. Years later, their great-grandchildren would still tell the story of how Victoria and Kane met. How a stagecoach driver had left her in the desert to die. How a cowboy had found her trail and brought her water. How they had fallen in love despite impossible odds. It became a family legend, a reminder that love could bloom in the harshest conditions, that kindness and courage could change lives, and that sometimes the people we are meant to be with find us exactly when we need them most. The house they had built still stood, occupied now by descendants who treasured it as a link to the past. The mine had long since closed, but the land was protected as a historical site. And somewhere in the desert of Arizona, near a large boulder and a stand of creosote bushes, there was a place where a woman had nearly died, and a man had saved her, where 2 lives had intersected and changed forever. It was just a spot of sand and rock, unremarkable to anyone who did not know its significance. But for those who knew the story, it was sacred ground. The place where love had been born out of compassion, where strength had met strength, where 2 souls had found each other against all odds and had refused to let go. Victoria and Kane's story lived on, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love and the resilience of the human spirit. They had faced danger, corruption, and death itself, and they had prevailed not through violence or cunning, but through honesty, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to each other. In the end, that was their true legacy. Not the mine or the ranch or the material things they had built, but the love they had shared and the family they had created. It was a legacy worth having, a life worth living, and a story worth telling. And so it was told, again and again, in the warm evenings when families gathered, and the past felt close enough to touch. The story of the stagecoach driver who left her in the desert, the cowboy who found her trail and brought her water, and the love that saved them both.